I always believed the greatest betrayals arrived with a roar. But the truth is, they whisper, delivered by the hand you grasp the tightest. She was the blueprint for perfection, the career, the family, the dazzling confidence. We shared a history I thought was unbreakable, unaware that the deepest roots often conceal the sharpest, most calculated blades. What began as professional rivalry became an insidious erosion of reality. Every moment of self-doubt, every perceived failure, was a brick meticulously laid by the one I trusted most. The perfect lie doesn't aim to shatter the glass, it simply makes the surface perpetually dirty, convincing you that you are the one spiraling out of control. Now, finding the truth requires sacrificing the last remaining pieces of my own innocence. The fight to win back a life depends on mastering the cruelty she taught me. If you've experienced this or something similar, leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe and like to see more emotional stories. Let's continue now. I, Olivia Hayes, 32, always lived by the metric of success I saw reflected in the eyes of my closest confidante, Jocelyn Thorne, 32. If life were a meticulously crafted diamond, Jocelyn possessed the flawless 10-carat solitaire. She had the corner office at Vance & Stone Associates, though not the corner office yet, the kind of relentless professional energy that made 80-hour weeks look chic, and a curated social life that spoke of legacy and unquestioned belonging. We met in college, two ambitious young women clawing our way up the finance ladder, and by 2018, we were both standing on the precipice of true executive power within the brutally competitive confines of our high-rise temple in the USA. Our friendship was the foundation of my early adult life, a bedrock against the shifting sands of corporate rivalry. We shared a history that stretched back to scraped knees on playground asphalt, through late-night study sessions fueled by desperation and coffee, and finally, into the cold, minimalist glass towers of Manhattan. I wore the physical embodiment of that bond every day, the sterling charm bracelet, a delicate silver chain we had exchanged during our final year of university, each charm representing a shared milestone, the tiny book for our first major project win, the miniature globe for our post-graduation travel pact. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a testament to an unshakable connection. Jocelyn was always there, a steady, supportive presence, especially as the competition for the coveted executive director position heated up. That promotion, a lifetime goal for both of us, was the invisible finish line, the one prize that would finally validate the grueling years we spent sacrificing everything else. The manipulation didn't start with a dramatic flourish, it began with dust motes. Fine, almost invisible particles of doubt settling on the pristine surface of my confidence. It was so subtle, so interwoven with Jocelyn's characteristic, nurturing tone, that I accepted her narrative of my decline as gospel. "Oh, Liv, you look exhausted," she'd say, leaning across the polished teak table in the executive lunchroom at Vance & Stone, her flawless platinum blonde hair never once disturbed. "Maybe you should delegate the analysis on the Emerson file. You know how meticulous you are, but you could burn out before the Q3 presentation." I would nod, grateful for her concern, convinced she was the only one who truly understood the pressure. She wasn't offering relief, she was priming me to relinquish control, ensuring the right files landed in the wrong hands, or rather, ensuring she was the only one tracking the crucial details I was too overwhelmed to manage. The fog began to thicken around 2022. This was the year the architectural masterpiece of my isolation truly took form. My performance, once rock solid, began to waver, not spectacularly, but just enough to raise a quiet, concerned eyebrow from upper management. The incidents were small, isolated, and always explainable, except that they weren't. A crucial meeting I missed because the calendar notification never popped up on my desktop. A key metric I misquoted during a small internal review, only to find the correct figures buried 3 folders deep in an unnamed directory. Each misstep was followed by Jocelyn's immediate, soothing intervention. "Don't worry, darling, I found the final budget draft right where you left it." "Easy mistake, honestly, we're all juggling too much," she would murmur, her hand resting warmly on my shoulder. She wasn't cleaning up my messes, she was creating them and then handing me the sponge, convincing me the mess was inherently mine. I began spending late nights alone in my luxurious, silent apartment at the Aestia Residences, high above the glittering indifference of the city, not working, but meticulously backtracking, trying to locate the exact moment I had become incompetent. My internal monologue became a constant interrogation. Did I save the file? Did I check my email? Was I truly capable of this level of responsibility, or had I simply been lucky until now? Jocelyn, meanwhile, was thriving. She began taking on my most sensitive projects, citing my recent stress. She introduced me to newer supportive colleagues who subtly undermined my ideas during brainstorming sessions, only to have Jocelyn later defend me, reinforcing the narrative that I was becoming erratic. "It's the pressure, Liv," she confided one evening over overpriced French wine at the Sterling Crest Club, an environment where discretion was the currency of the elite. "They see your potential, but they also see the strain. You need to present stability." She convinced me that my professional survival depended on projecting calmness, which, ironically, meant suppressing the very anxiety her actions were creating. The more I internalized my failings, the stronger her position became. The perfect friend was slowly turning into the perfect architect of my isolation. My personal relationships suffered too. I grew defensive, snapping at colleagues who dared to ask about my workload, interpreting genuine concern as doubt. I pushed away my own support system, convinced they were judging the increasingly unstable Olivia Hayes, 32. The low point, the true rock bottom of my professional confidence, arrived in the summer of 2022, during the Q3 corporate meltdown. The presentation was scheduled to solidify my bid for the executive position. I was presenting the comprehensive analysis for a multi-million-dollar prospective client, the Prescott account. I strode into the boardroom at Vance and Stone, the room packed with the oversight committee, feeling a fragile certainty that this was my redemption. I clicked the first slide. My voice was steady as I began detailing the financial projections. Then, the questions started. Sharp, focused, devastating. I confidently referred to my notes, based on weeks of intense preparation and the data compiled in the Prescott account binder. Based on the low-risk model, we anticipate a conservative 12% growth. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes," interrupted Ms. Davies, holding a printout. "Our records from the database you provided show that calculation only holds if the currency fluctuation remains below 0.5%. Your provided data in the system shows it is trending at 1.8%. My blood ran cold. That data point was wrong. Terribly wrong. I flipped through the hard copy of the Prescott account binder I had brought. The figures printed there were correct, but the digital files, the ones submitted to the central database, were erroneous, leading to wildly optimistic and incorrect forecasts. I panicked. I scrambled for an explanation, convinced I must have swapped two files in a late-night haze of fatigue. The presentation dissolved into a formal questioning of my competence. It wasn't just a failure, it was an organizational embarrassment. The firm looked sloppy, and I, the face of the account, looked negligent. The oversight committee hearing was a formality, my reputation was shredded. Jocelyn, seated near the back, watched the entire spectacle unfold. Afterward, she followed me back to my office, her face a mask of wounded sympathy. "Liv, I am so sorry. You were brilliant, but that data, it just killed the whole presentation," she lamented, hugging me tight as I fought back tears of humiliation. "Did you possibly put the old draft into the submission portal? It happens when you're overworked." She never had to admit guilt. She simply confirmed my suspicion of my own failing memory and carelessness. She had clearly swapped the files in the shared system, ensured the mistake was irreversible, and then kept the physical binder pristine so that I looked like a liar or, worse, a scatterbrained wreck. I retreated to the Aestia residences, spending the next few weeks submerged in a dark sea of self-doubt. I truly believed I was spiraling. My piercing green eyes, once sharp with ambition, now reflected only fatigue and confusion. It took months of professional therapy and mandatory sabbatical, to look beyond the fog of self-recrimination. The breakthrough didn't come from therapy, it came from a single, cold, rational realization: my mistakes were always too perfect, too targeted. They always served a singular purpose: clearing the way for Jocelyn. The shift happened in the spring of 2024. The executive director position, delayed by the Q3 disaster, was finally back on the table. Jocelyn was the uncontested favorite. I started fighting back, not with accusations, but with meticulous, cold observation. I adopted the skeptical, defensive posture that the betrayal had forged in me. I started cross-referencing every shared document, every meeting agenda, and every casual recommendation Jocelyn offered. I discovered the pattern. A delayed internal memo here. A subtly misworded email there that directed my attention away from crucial data analysis. It wasn't luck, it was architecture. The final piece of the puzzle arrived indirectly, through a chance meeting with a retired partner of Vance and Stone at a benefit held at the Sterling Crest Club. He mentioned, offhand, how much Jocelyn reminded him of her mother, not physically, but in her preternatural ability to navigate the unspoken hierarchies. That conversation led me to research Jocelyn's maternal line. I knew the Thorne family was old money, but I hadn't known the depth of their reputation for quiet, psychological cruelty. This is where I learned about Eleanor Thorne, 64. The matriarch, the architect before the architect. Her reputation was terrifyingly consistent. Every professional victory in her decades-long career had a documented, if untraceable, casualty, a colleague whose career mysteriously imploded just before Eleanor stepped into their position. She wasn't loud or vulgar, she was elegant, composed, and absolutely ruthless. Her eyes, cold blue and fixed, suggested a woman who viewed human connection as merely a tool for leverage. The perfect life Jocelyn had constructed, the impeccable career, the serene confidence, was not earned through simple hard work. It was the current, polished iteration of a family legacy built on psychological warfare. I realized I wasn't fighting my best friend, I was fighting generations of calculated deceit. I needed proof, not just for the oversight committee, but for myself, to dissolve the lingering doubt that I was still the one imagining things. The ultimate evidence came disguised as a sentimental gesture. Jocelyn and I were scheduled for the mandatory corporate strategy off-site, the Aspen Retreat confrontation, 3 months later, in the height of the fall. I knew I had to use this secluded environment for the final, decisive move. I prepared meticulously. I knew Jocelyn kept a safe deposit box at her bank, accessed only occasionally. I employed a discreet, highly skilled private investigator, a move that cost me every last cent of my savings, to monitor her movements, looking for an opening, a lapse in her perfect control. The opportunity arose a week before the retreat. Jocelyn was traveling to London for a quick, essential meeting. The investigator, leveraging a minor oversight in the Thorne family security system, gained access to a specific, seldom-used family safe located within Eleanor's estate, not Jocelyn's apartment. What they retrieved was not financial data or corporate secrets, but something far more damning, Eleanor's inheritance journal. The journal, bound in antique, worn leather, wasn't a diary of emotions, it was a clinical documentation of method. Eleanor had meticulously recorded her successful campaigns of psychological erosion, detailing techniques of gaslighting, isolation, and calculated sabotage, referring to them as the principles of invisible warfare. One passage, dated years earlier, detailed how to use a victim's inherent loyalty against them, ensuring they remained close enough to be controlled but isolated enough to lack external credibility. Another section detailed the art of misplaced evidence, a chilling breakdown of how to slightly corrupt digital files while keeping physical copies clean, ensuring the victim questions their own sanity. It was the blueprint for the Q3 corporate meltdown. The final few entries, written by Eleanor just before passing the journal on, specifically mentioned teaching the final refinement to her talented successor, a successor identified only by the initials J.T. I held the journal in my hands at the Aestia residences, the city lights blurring outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. The fog didn't just lift, it evaporated. The cold, desperate clarity that replaced it was terrifying. I hadn't failed, I had been surgically dismantled. Turning the tables on Jocelyn required becoming someone unrecognizable to myself. Innocence was the first casualty. I had to discard my moral compass and embrace the very tool she had expertly wielded. If she sought to destroy me through illusion, I would destroy her with unassailable truth, framed within a new, equally sophisticated illusion. The Aspen retreat confrontation was set against a backdrop of crisp mountain air and faux corporate camaraderie. We were scheduled for a private strategy session on the first afternoon. I arrived wearing the Sterling charm bracelet. It felt heavy, a shackle of misplaced trust. Jocelyn arrived exactly on time, radiant in cashmere, her smile professionally warm. Ready to map out the next 5 years, Liv? We need to present a united front for the Oversight Committee. We sat at a small table overlooking the snow-dusted peaks. I started the meeting normally, discussing market shares and competitor analysis. Then, I leaned forward. Jocelyn, I said, my voice quiet, flat. Tell me about the Q3 presentation. Not the mistake I made, but the mistake you made me make. Jocelyn's composure didn't even flicker. She tilted her head, a practiced look of concerned confusion settling on her features. Liv, we've been over this. That was a high-stress period. You know you accidentally used the draft figures, I interrupted, placing the Sterling charm bracelet on the table between us. The tiny silver charms gleamed under the recessed lighting. I know the truth, Jocelyn. Every misplaced file, every missed meeting. I know you were paving your path using my back as the foundation. I paused, letting the silence hang. And I know where you learned it. I reached into my briefcase and placed a black and white photograph beside the bracelet. It was a high-resolution image of a specific page from Eleanor's inheritance journal. The excerpt detailed the Q3 strategy, using almost identical code words to the ones Jocelyn had used to gaslight me afterward. Finally, the mask cracked. Not in panic, but in pure, clinical recognition. Her expression shifted from fake sympathy to something profoundly unsettling, a detached admiration. You've been busy, Jocelyn Thorne, 32, stated, picking up the photograph. She examined it critically, as if judging the quality of the paper. You've truly come a long way from the girl who cried over a B- in macroeconomics. It's not enough to be smart, Liv, she continued, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper that was more chilling than a shout. It's about control. Mother taught me that innocence is a weakness, loyalty is a vulnerability, and friendship is merely the most effective disguise for ambition. She picked up the bracelet. This was my insurance policy. The deeper your emotional investment, the less likely you are to see the knife. Yes, the lie was constructed perfectly. And yes, it was passed down. She didn't deny it, she owned it, boasting of the generational talent for malice. You won't use that journal, she said, tossing the photo back. It's hearsay. It's private property. And if you go public with this theatrical story, they will look at you, the woman who had a breakdown after Q3, and they will see paranoia, not proof. You'll destroy yourself, and he'll still get the promotion. She had identified the critical flaw, my lack of credibility. I had used her tactics to find the truth, but I couldn't deploy the truth without sacrificing my remaining professional standing. But I was no longer the innocent, self-doubting Olivia Hayes. I was hardened, cynical, and ready to pay the price. You're right, I conceded calmly, leaning back. The journal is insufficient proof for the Oversight Committee. But it's the key to something else. I didn't need to prove Jocelyn sabotaged me. I just needed to prove she was capable of sabotage, and that her family history confirmed a legacy of institutional corruption that Vance and Stone would never tolerate. This led to the counteroffensive leak. Over the next 2 weeks, using the structural insight provided by Eleanor's inheritance journal, which contained subtle references to past Thorne family financial misdeeds that had been meticulously covered up decades ago, I initiated a targeted, anonymous information leak. I focused the disclosure not on our rivalry, but on the past ethical breaches of the Thorne family's long-standing contracts with Vance and Stone, specifically citing the involvement of Eleanor Thorne, 64, during her own tenure. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. The investigation, once triggered, wasn't about a missing file binder, it was about protecting the firm's reputation against decades of veiled corruption tied to one of its founding families. Jocelyn's perfect, unblemished life was the first thing they examined. The official decision was slated for the Oversight Committee hearing at Vance and Stone. The pressure was suffocating. I walked into the room ready to accept either victory or total personal annihilation. Jocelyn was there, but she was subdued. The effortless elegance was replaced by a coiled, brittle tension. The focus of the hearing had entirely shifted. The committee chairman, Mr. Harrison, spoke first, addressing me. Ms. Hayes, the committee has reviewed your candidacy. While your performance metrics have shown recent volatility, your initiative in identifying historical risks associated with long-term firm relationships has been noted. He turned to Jocelyn. Thorne, due to ongoing, sensitive external investigations into the historical practices of several long-term affiliates, and given the necessity of maintaining absolute corporate integrity for the executive director role, your candidacy has been indefinitely suspended pending the outcome of these inquiries. Jocelyn didn't flinch. She simply stared at me, her eyes, usually cold, now burning with a realization that I had mastered her game. I won. I received the executive director position. It was everything I had ever wanted, the corner office, the influence, the validation. I had fought the perfect lie and exposed it. But the victory tasted like ash. The consequence of becoming a strategic manipulator, even in self-defense, was profound. I sat in my new, magnificent office at Vance and Stone Associates, staring out at the Manhattan skyline from the Aestia residences, and felt utterly hollow. The cost of winning back my life was the complete loss of my former self. I had learned to doubt everyone, to see loyalty as a potential trap, and to view every casual interaction as a strategic maneuver. I had become the skeptic, the defensive strategist I never intended to be. My relationship with Jocelyn was annihilated, replaced by a cold, mutual respect born of brutal combat. She eventually left the firm, quietly, to manage the family's fallout with Eleanor Thorne, who was now facing the painful unraveling of her carefully constructed legacy. The lingering question, the one that haunted the silence of my victory, remained: was her lie truly perfect? No. It wasn't perfect because the architecture of deceit demands proximity. She kept me too close, thinking my love and loyalty were her tools, never realizing they were also the proximity I needed to discover the foundation of her perfect facade. She forgot that even the most meticulous construction leaves microscopic traces of dust. But in the brutal fight to reveal it, the price was too high. I got the job, the money, and the power. I did not get my friend back, I did not retrieve my lost innocence, and I certainly did not win back the pieces of myself she chipped away. I had paid the highest price imaginable. I learned to lie perfectly, too. And in doing so, we had utterly destroyed the only true thing that ever connected us, the simple, trusting bond symbolized by the sterling charm bracelet, which I finally, definitively, discarded into the cold, uncaring current of the East River, mirroring the coldness that now resided where trust once lived. The perfect lie didn't shatter us, the war against it hollowed us out, leaving two victorious ghosts in its wake. The silence of the executive director suite at Vance and Stone Associates was heavy, lined with polished teak and the mute, arrogant geometry of high-end corporate architecture. It was the physical embodiment of everything I had spent the last decade fighting for. The view, spanning the entirety of Manhattan's nervous, glittering energy, was meant to feel expansive, yet it felt claustrophobic. I, Olivia, sat behind a desk that could comfortably seat a small dinner party, and the air around me was sterile, devoid of the warmth that loyalty and shared ambition used to provide. The victory felt less like an achievement and more like the grim acquisition of real estate after a devastating fire. My first week in the role was a masterclass in controlled paranoia. Every congratulatory handshake felt like an attempt to gauge weakness. Every smile was analyzed for its angle and duration. I had learned to read the corporate language of betrayal, and now that language was the only one I spoke fluently. The promotion had not elevated me to a realm of security, it had simply changed the rules of engagement. Now, the knives came from below, not from the side. I caught myself in small, insidious acts of self-monitoring. When reviewing crucial data files, I would not trust the central server or the analyst who compiled it, I would perform the calculations myself, 3 times, searching for the phantom error, the misplaced decimal, the subtly corrupted input that I knew, intimately, could dismantle an entire career. Jocelyn had taught me the necessity of eternal vigilance, but she had also infected me with the suspicion that no one, absolutely no one, was operating without a hidden agenda. The office, my trophy, was also my cage. I found myself missing the cramped, shared struggle of my old cubicle life, where mistakes were openly corrected and ambition was a collective fever. Here, ambition was silent, masked, and dangerous. The Oversight Committee had praised my initiative in historical risk management, a euphemism for whistleblowing that had brought down the shadow of the Thorne family legacy. The firm had been forced to move swiftly and decisively to contain the potential fallout from Eleanor's decades-old financial machinations. The investigation, triggered by my anonymous leak, ensured that while Jocelyn was not formally accused of sabotaging me, she was inextricably linked to a poisonous lineage that compromised the firm's integrity. The optics were lethal. Vance and Stone could not elevate the daughter of a tainted legacy to the highest executive position. I knew Jocelyn was watching. I knew she was analyzing my every professional decision, waiting for me to falter under the weight of the very position she coveted. Her silence was not surrender, it was a tactical withdrawal, an acknowledgement of the stalemate. I tried to regain a semblance of my former self. I invited old colleagues, those who had endured my erratic behavior during the 2 years of gaslighting, out for drinks at the kind of comfortable, low-key bar that was the antithesis of the Sterling Crest Club. But the connection was broken. They looked at me differently now. They saw the executive director, the woman who had survived a political bloodbath. They saw the victor, and victory, when stained with ruthlessness, is isolating. "You've changed, Olivia," one friend, James, dared to say one evening, carefully stirring his martini. "You used to trust the data. Now, you seem to trust nothing but your own gut, and that gut seems to expect the worst." He was right. I was relying entirely on the cold, hard logic that Jocelyn's methods had accidentally forged in me. Trust was a liability. Prediction was protection. My apartment at the Aestia residences became less a haven and more a bunker. I spent evenings rereading snippets of Eleanor's inheritance journal, not for further evidence, but for understanding. I studied Eleanor's chilling, elegant prose describing the principles of invisible warfare. It was a textbook on human manipulation, detailing how to turn affection into leverage, how to use a target's core values like loyalty or ambition as the very mechanism of their destruction. The most effective lie, Eleanor had written in a delicate, sloping hand, is not the one you tell, but the one you allow the target to construct for themselves. Provide the foundation of doubt, and they will build the cage of their own incompetence. This sentence was the key to my 2 lost years. I hadn't been defeated by external force, I had been coaxed into self-immolation. The turning point, the moment I crossed the Rubicon entirely, came 6 weeks into my new directorship. It involved a young analyst named Ben, a bright, earnest kid who had made a minor but consequential error in the formatting of a regulatory compliance report. The error wouldn't destroy the firm, but it would result in a substantial financial penalty and a black mark on my newly appointed leadership. In the old days, the innocent Olivia would have taken the blame internally, protected the subordinate, and instituted new training protocols. That Olivia was dead. I called Ben into my vast office. He was shaking, anticipating a formal reprimand, maybe even termination. I sat him down, offered him water, and adopted the posture I had seen Jocelyn perfect, sympathy-led over steel. "Ben, this formatting error on the quarterly compliance is serious," I said, my voice low and concerned, exactly mirroring Jocelyn's tone when she had gently guided me toward the Q3 disaster. He stammered, apologizing profusely. "I know you were under pressure," I continued, leaning slightly closer. "But this report has to be flawless. This kind of mistake, even if small, suggests a lack of attention to detail that senior partners will interpret as carelessness, not exhaustion." I paused, letting the fear sink in. Then, I offered the solution, which was, in fact, the ultimate manipulation. "I can shield you from the formal reprimand," I whispered, "but to do that, we need to ensure the official internal records reflect a specific scenario, that the system generated a conflict when transferring data from your workstation to the central repository. A glitch. It happens often at this scale, truly. Ben stared at me, his eyes wide. He knew the error was his. But he also knew the consequences of accepting the responsibility were catastrophic for his fledgling career. I was asking him to confirm a lie, a small, systemic distortion, to protect him from a professional truth. I was offering him complicity as a shield. He nodded slowly, relieved, desperate, and already compromised. I understand, Olivia. A system glitch. I'll draft the report now. As he left, the massive door clicking shut behind him, I felt a physical sickness, a cold realization that went far beyond mere disappointment. I had just used the very architecture of deceit that Jocelyn and Eleanor had perfected, gaslighting a subordinate into doubting his own error and accepting an organized narrative, to maintain my pristine image of control. I hadn't just won the game, I had become the game itself. The cost of winning back my life was not just the loss of trust, it was the acquisition of a moral flexibility that made me identical to my adversary. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the USA skyline. The truth was, the executive director title required a certain level of controlled cynicism. Jocelyn hadn't been wrong about the environment, she had simply been decades ahead in mastering its cruelty. The immediate relief of having solved the compliance problem was quickly replaced by profound self-loathing. I was now performing the perfect life that Jocelyn had modeled, but my perfection was built on an active, daily maintenance of small, effective lies. The true climax of the saga wasn't the oversight committee hearing, it was this quiet, terrible moment in my office, watching an innocent person choose manipulation over honesty because I, the symbol of authority, had conditioned him to believe it was the only path to survival. I had always believed that truth was armor. Now, I understood that truth was merely ammunition, and that strategic falsehood was the superior shield. I retreated that evening to the ASD residences, the expensive quiet amplifying my internal chaos. I poured myself a glass of aged whiskey, ignoring the glittering reflection in the window, the successful, 32-year-old executive director. The lingering question remains, in the end, was her lie truly perfect? I pondered this, reviewing the history. Jocelyn's lie wasn't perfect because it relied too heavily on my emotional bond to her. She confused loyalty with blind stupidity. Her strategic error was sentimental, she kept the sterling charm bracelet and allowed the pretense of friendship to continue, believing that proximity was only beneficial to her. She failed to anticipate that deep emotional investment, when poisoned, could trigger a reaction as powerful as the betrayal itself. Her overconfidence, a trait inherited from Eleanor, was the microscopic fissure in her flawless facade. She thought the system of deception she wielded was absolute. But the real perfection was in the consequence of the lie. Jocelyn and Eleanor had created a system of psychological warfare designed to isolate and destroy. I had successfully reversed the target, but I had failed to dismantle the weapon. Instead, I had picked it up and pointed it at the next person who threatened my equilibrium. The ultimate tragedy was that the war forced me to accept the premise of the lie, that ruthlessness is necessary, and that strategic cruelty is simply efficiency under pressure. By winning, I validated everything Jocelyn believed. I had become the cold, fiercely guarded, strategic professional she had always pretended to be, and deep down, I knew she would recognize and respect the transformation. She had successfully engineered her replacement. A few months later, I received a cryptic package at Vance & Stone. It was a single, heavy, silver object, polished to a blinding shine. It was the final, tiny charm from the sterling charm bracelet, the miniature globe we had vowed to travel with. The rest of the bracelet remained somewhere at the bottom of the East River, but this one charm, this symbol of our shared pact, had found its way back to me. There was no note. There was no sender address. But I knew it was from Jocelyn. It wasn't a threat, it was a final, chilling acknowledgement. You finished the job. You have become me. We are now equal. I gripped the small silver globe, its surface cold against my palm. In the war against the perfect lie, innocence had been the first casualty, but the final casualty was the very ability to distinguish truth from necessary fiction. I looked at the globe, then dropped it into the polished rosewood drawer of my desk, beside the new, meticulously organized version of the Prescott account binder, which was now always checked, audited, and secured behind triple-layered passwords. I didn't throw it away. I kept it as a morbid reminder of the ghost who shared this office with me, the ghost of my past self, and the ghost of the woman who had created my present self. The fight to reveal her deception utterly destroyed the old Olivia. The new Olivia, the executive director, was composed entirely of scar tissue and strategy. The executive position, the view, the unassailable power, it was all mine. The perfect life was achieved. But it was a perfect lie built on the ruins of everything that had once mattered. There was no warmth, only the cold, hard certainty of control. I closed the drawer, the faint click echoing in the vast, silent room. The perfect lie didn't shatter us, the war against it hollowed us out, leaving two victorious ghosts in its wake, separated by miles but forever bound by a legacy of calculated cruelty. The window reflected my face, sharp, ambitious, utterly devoid of softness. I had mastered the art of the lie, and in doing so, I had finally, fully, won the battle, only to realize the war had been against myself all along. The victory had provided altitude, but not distance. I sat in the silent, glass-walled office at Vance and Stone, the symbol of my reclaimed future, and found that my mind refused to inhabit the present. It always retreated to the cold, rarefied air of the Rockies, to the place where the perfect lie finally fractured, and the price of the truth was first calculated. The Aspen Retreat. It was meant to be a bonding exercise for the firm's future executive leadership, a few days of strategic planning, light hiking, and heavy networking. It was 2024, early summer. The Q3 meltdown was months behind me, but the residual frost of self-doubt still clung to my professional demeanor. I was perpetually exhausted, fighting the phantom sensation of missing files and questioning my own memory in every meeting. I was the damaged product, and Jocelyn, impeccably tailored even in hiking gear, was the shining example of stability and grace. We were staying in a sprawling mountain lodge, all reclaimed timber and high-end minimalism. One evening, after the planned events had concluded and the rest of the senior team was socializing, I found myself walking through the silent halls, drawn toward the faint light spilling from Jocelyn's private suite. I wasn't looking for conflict, I was looking for confirmation. I had spent the prior month digging. Not through financial reports, I had already proven the systemic data corruption affecting the Prescott account binder, but through archives. Specifically, the old, obscure records of Eleanor's involvement in historic real estate deals that had skirted regulatory lines decades ago. The anonymous leak was already prepared, I just needed the final, damning piece, the why. I knocked once, sharply, on Jocelyn's door. She opened it, wearing a silk dressing gown the color of moonstone, her platinum hair pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. She didn't look surprised, only faintly curious, as if I were a predictable variable in her evening planning. "Olivia. Come in. I was just reviewing tomorrow's itinerary. Are you having trouble sleeping again?" she asked, her voice the smooth, comforting balm she always deployed when she was, in fact, administering poison. I stepped inside. The room was immaculate, dominated by a large fireplace where a carefully manicured fire crackled. "No trouble sleeping, Jocelyn," I said, my voice unnervingly steady, even to my own ears. I held up the ancient, worn leather journal. "Trouble believing." Jocelyn's composure did not break. Her eyes, usually cool and expressive, became perfectly opaque. She didn't glance at the journal, she looked only at me. "What is that, a piece of historical fiction?" she asked, walking toward a small bar to pour herself a glass of water. "It's a legacy," I corrected, moving to the mantelpiece. The heat from the fire felt good on my hands, though my interior felt like glacier ice. It documents Eleanor's principles of invisible warfare. Specifically, the chapter on creating the controlled collapse. It's fascinating, really. She details how to exploit a target's core strength until they perceive it as their core weakness. My ambition, Jocelyn. You turned my ambition into paranoia. I watched her take a slow sip of water. She placed the glass down with precision. The only sound in the room was the whispering fire. And what exactly does this historical document have to do with you and me, Olivia? She finally asked, her tone flat, bored. She was still testing me, seeing if I was going to back down, apologize for my paranoia, and hand the weapon back to her. Everything, I said, moving closer. You didn't just sabotage the Q3 presentation data. You didn't just misplace the critical reports from the binder. That was just the mechanism. The real work was the erosion. The whispers you planted with James about my lack of focus. The constant, gentle suggestions that I was overworking myself, right before a major deadline. You made me believe I was losing my mind, not my data. I threw the journal onto the chaise lounge. It landed with a soft, yet definitive thud. The most devastating part of the book, Jocelyn, is the section on the cultivation of trust. Eleanor states that deep personal history is the highest form of leverage. She says the target will fight logic and evidence before they fight the memory of a shared childhood. I met her eyes. You used the Sterling charm bracelet as a shield, didn't you? Every time I started to suspect, I looked at that bracelet, remembered scraped knees and whispered secrets, and I dismissed the suspicion as my own toxic jealousy. You made me choose between believing in our friendship and believing in my own sanity. A profound, breathtaking silence fell. For a moment, I thought I had broken her, that the decades of shared history might finally force a crack in the armor. Then, Jocelyn smiled. It wasn't the sweet, supportive smile I had known for 30 years. It was sharper, purer, almost predatory. It was the smile of someone who had just been complimented on a masterpiece. You finally figured it out, she murmured, walking toward the fire, basking in the heat. It took you longer than I anticipated, honestly. I thought after the binder incident, you might retreat entirely, assume a breakdown, take a sabbatical. She turned, crossing her arms. You see the elegance, don't you? If I had just fabricated a scandal, it would have been messy, traceable. But I gave you the evidence, Olivia. I made you watch yourself fail. You were your own worst enemy, and I was just the helpful, concerned friend holding the mirror. The cold clarity hit me like a physical blow. The fog, which had thickened around me for 2 years, finally lifted entirely, replaced by a blinding, terrible light. Why? I managed, the word a rasp. We were going to the top together. We promised each other that. Jocelyn laughed, a short, brittle sound that held no joy. The promise of shared success is a comforting myth, Olivia. A useful narrative for subordinates. But the executive suite is not built for two. It is built for one, and it was always meant to be mine. It is my legacy. She gestured toward the journal. You've read Eleanor's book. You know the history. We are not just businesswomen, we are architects of influence. The thorns manage reality. My mother taught me that power isn't about the title you hold, it's about the conviction with which you make others doubt their own perceptions. That position, the one you covet, represents the pinnacle of control. It requires a mind capable of seeing 10 steps ahead, and the emotional detachment to ensure nothing, not friendship, not history, interferes. She looked genuinely disappointed, not angry, that I had uncovered the mechanism. You were good, Olivia, truly stellar. But you possessed one fatal flaw that I simply could not afford to take with me to the top: integrity. You cared about the data. You cared about the team. You would have sacrificed the strategic advantage for the moral high ground. That is weakness here, she said, indicating the window, behind which the glittering, brutal landscape of corporate ambition lay visible. So you played the long game, I stated, recognizing the profound effort involved. You spent years building my confidence, only to spend 2 years dismantling it, brick by brick. Exactly, Jocelyn confirmed, her voice filled with quiet pride. It was a test, a brutal assessment. Could you survive the system? Could you see the pattern? Could you fight back when everything told you that you were the problem? I needed a rival worthy of the game, and you almost failed entirely. You were spiraling, Olivia. The self-doubt was consuming you. And you were enjoying it, I realized, the depth of her cruelty finally registering. This wasn't merely professional rivalry, it was sport. It was necessary, Jocelyn corrected, leaning in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the false intimacy deployed one last time. And look at the result. You dug, didn't you? You didn't run. You are resilient. You found Eleanor's journal, a document only I was supposed to know the true significance of. You've gone to morally grey territory to find the truth. That, Olivia, is the kind of ruthlessness this firm demands. You may not have realized it, but I gave you the blueprint for survival. She reached toward me, her hand stopping inches from my arm. If you expose me now, before the oversight committee meets, they will see you as unhinged, reacting violently to professional pressure. They will see a friend's professional concern twisted into a conspiracy theory. Your testimony alone is insufficient. You need an undeniable, objective truth. I have it, I said, holding her gaze. I hadn't brought the journal for dramatic effect. I had brought it because it completed the puzzle of the counteroffensive leak. Jocelyn's face finally lost its controlled perfection. Her jaw tightened, and the elegant composure shattered, replaced by raw shock. You used Eleanor's own strategy against her, she breathed, realization dawning. No, I corrected, the adrenaline surging through me. I used the consequence of her legacy. The leak doesn't mention you or the firm's current assets. It implicates Eleanor in the historical contract violations that set the foundation for the family fortune. Vance and Stone can ignore a petty rivalry. They cannot ignore a potential familial tie to a federal financial investigation, especially not for the executive director role. I had leveraged the family legacy itself, the weight of Eleanor's lifetime of subtle cruelties, to make Jocelyn politically toxic. The moment of triumph was immediate and absolute, but tasted metallic and bitter. Jocelyn stared at me, the years of friendship melting away to reveal the fierce, strategic mind beneath. She didn't scream or plead. She simply nodded, a slow, grudging acknowledgement of defeat. Perfect, she whispered, not in surrender, but in a final, terrifying admiration. You learned the lesson, Olivia. You became the weapon. That was the Aspen retreat confrontation. I left her suite and, 48 hours later, executed the final stages of the plan. The Oversight Committee hearing was a formality, the decision had already been made by the toxic weight of the Thorn name. Jocelyn took her leave, Eleanor's historical machinations were quietly contained, and I ascended to the executive role. But the cost, as I reflected now, weeks into my new role in the sterile comfort of the austere residences, was still accruing. The silence in my apartment tonight was punctuated only by the occasional mournful wail of a distant ambulance, a stark contrast to the quiet, perfect life I was now professionally leading. I walked into the study, picking up the small silver globe charm from the drawer where I had placed it, the final, chilling gift from Jocelyn. Her message was clear: we are now equal. She hadn't just destroyed the old Olivia, she had replaced her with a superior, more functional model built for the Vance and Stone environment. The old Olivia, the one who would have fiercely defended Ben from the compliance era, the one who would have trusted James implicitly, the one who believed ambition could coexist with empathy, was gone. That Olivia had been too soft for this stratosphere. The new Olivia existed in a state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for the next system glitch, the next misplaced file, the next carefully orchestrated erosion of reality. I remembered a conversation with James, weeks after the oversight hearing. I had invited him out, trying to mend the relationship that Jocelyn had subtly undermined. We were sitting in that familiar, low-key bar, the antithesis of the exclusivity of the Sterling Crest Club. James had been hesitant, guarded. I still don't understand, Olivia, he had confessed, swirling the ice in his glass. Jocelyn seemed genuinely concerned about you. She was always the one defending your workload, saying we needed to cut you slack. We saw her as your rock. I had forced a polite, remote smile. She was very good at her job, James. The manipulation was comprehensive. But James wasn't looking at the past, he was looking at me, the new, polished, sharp-edged executive director. I get that she betrayed you, Liv, he said, using the old nickname. But you don't seem relieved. You just seem harder. Like you proved her right. His words had been an arrow finding its mark. I hadn't argued. I couldn't. Jocelyn's lie wasn't perfect because it was discovered. I had the documents, the timeline, the evidence of financial malfeasance that provided the leverage. The external structure of her life, her position, her reputation, was destroyed. The perfect lie was the internal one. The perfection lay in its enduring truth, that to thrive in this environment, one must adopt the mask of ruthlessness. Jocelyn had orchestrated a scenario that forced me to shed my innocence and embrace calculated self-interest as the only path to survival. I had achieved the perfect life, the corner office, the power, the untouchable reputation. But the life itself was based on an emotional falsehood, a continuous performance of controlled strength. I looked down at the tiny silver globe charm in my hand. It represented the world we were supposed to conquer together, side by side. Now, I held it alone, having defeated the only person who truly understood the cost of ambition in this landscape. I opened Eleanor's inheritance journal one last time, turning to the last entry I had found, written long before Eleanor's final quiet disgrace: victory is not in the acquisition of power, but in the successful transmission of philosophy. Jocelyn had failed to acquire the position, but she had successfully transmitted the philosophy. I was the living proof that her worldview, the belief that loyalty is a weakness and strategic deceit is a skill, was correct. I walked back to the window in the Aestia residences. The city lights sparkled with the indifferent promise of endless opportunity and ruthless competition. I was no longer the victim of the lie, I was the guardian of the truth she had revealed. I placed the charm back in the drawer, closing it firmly. The sound was not a click of finality, but a latching shut. I was now operating entirely within the parameters of the war she had started. The perfect lie had not ultimately destroyed us both in a fiery explosion, it had achieved a far more insidious end, it had rendered us indistinguishable in our cold calculation. I had won the office, but she had won the soul. The war was over, leaving only a perfect, hard-won, and utterly joyless peace. Ready to navigate the true cost of success? Like and subscribe to master the climb.